The torches flickered along the palisade of Ashford Estate, their light dancing on damp Carolina wood. Hannah moved among the shadows, whispering to the guards, her calm voice slipping into ears already weary of commands. Their eyes wavered like men caught between two shores. Beyond, the master laughed drunkenly, blind to the cracks forming in the circle meant to shield him. Tonight, the very blades once raised in his defense would turn back upon him. By dawn, the guards would no longer stand at his side. The night pressed down heavy over the Carolina lowlands, thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. At the Ashford Estate, a fictional plantation that seemed more fortress than home, tall timber walls rose against the darkness. Torches blazed at intervals along the palisade, their light sharp and unforgiving. To those locked inside, those flames were not warmth but warning signs that vigilance was watching, that escape was sealed. The guards walked their patrol with rigid steps, boots thudding against the wooden walkways above. They were not men of honor, but hired instruments, their loyalty purchased and bound by fear as much as coin. Each carried the weight of steel at their side, reminders that violence was both their duty and their prison. The master boasted often that his walls were impregnable, that his guards would never falter. Yet beneath the surface of their silence lay unease. Below the walls, in the dirt courtyards where the enslaved gathered after a day's labor, eyes lifted toward the torchlight. The fire cast long shadows that reached down across their bent backs and scarred hands. To them, the flames symbolized no hearth, no sanctuary. They were fire stripped of comfort, burning without mercy, consuming what little hope remained. As one man whispered bitterly, "Those flames do not warm us, they burn our belief away." Among them moved Hannah, a young African-American woman in her 20s, slight of frame yet with a gaze that carried weight. She bore a bucket across her shoulders, water sloshing softly as she walked toward the kitchens. Her body showed the marks of labor, but her eyes never dulled. They carried a quiet defiance, a spark that no overseer's lash had managed to extinguish. She paused at the base of the wall, tilting her head upward. The line of guards looked down from their post, silhouetted against the angry glow of torches. For a moment, one of them shifted, his hand loosening on the hilt of his sword. He met her gaze briefly, and though the distance was great, something passed between them. She saw no devotion there, no pride in service, only fatigue, the hollow weariness of men trapped in roles they did not choose. Hannah lowered her eyes, continued forward, but the thought lingered. Perhaps these swords did not belong entirely to the master. Perhaps they, too, longed to turn in another direction. In that small flicker of recognition, she sensed the faintest crack in the wall. The torches burned, the guards marched, and the master slept content. But in the quiet places, in the pauses between steps and breaths, something restless stirred. Hannah carried her water into the shadows, her silence deeper than words, her gaze sharper than any blade. And in that silence, the first seed of betrayal found soil to root. Hannah had never been tall, nor striking, nor outwardly commanding. Her strength did not come from size or from force, but from the patience of one who listens. She was in her early 20s, with a lean frame shaped by endless hours of labor in the fields and kitchens. Yet her eyes, dark, unyielding, always observing, carried the quiet intensity of someone who had learned to see beneath the surface. As a child, she had worked in the master's kitchen, fetching pots, scrubbing floors, cleaning where others had left disorder. While her hands moved, her ears remained alert. She heard things others dismissed, the grumbling of overseers, the sighs of guards as they nursed sore feet, the muttered curses when the master was out of earshot. Most people heard only noise. Hannah heard confessions. Years of listening taught her to recognize the shifts in tone that revealed more than words. She could tell when a man's laughter masked exhaustion, when silence hid shame, when an oath of loyalty trembled with doubt. She knew the sound of fear when it clung to the edges of a voice, and she could sense when fear had grown so great that it threatened to spill over into rebellion. The guards of Ashford Estate were meant to inspire terror, but Hannah saw through their armor. They were men pressed into roles that consumed them, isolated, commanded, stripped of dignity each time their master ridiculed them in front of those they controlled. She recognized in their eyes the same chains that bound her people, only forged of a different metal. "Power," she once whispered to Ruth, her closest friend, "does not rest on the blade. It rests on the fear that keeps a hand steady when holding it." That thought lingered like a private prayer, repeated silently each night as she carried her bucket or bent over the wash. Gradually, Hannah began to realize a dangerous truth. Fear could turn in more than one direction. If fear kept a guard loyal to the master, then fear of dishonor, of betrayal, of being abandoned could loosen that loyalty. What had been used to hold them still might also be used to make them shift. She tested her knowledge carefully, watching faces as the master barked orders. She noted the tightening jaws, the eyes that flinched when insult was too sharp. Every weakness was stored quietly, not as gossip, but as pieces of a puzzle she had begun to solve. To her, the guards were not faceless oppressors. They were prisoners in different chains, weary of serving a man who demanded everything and gave nothing. And in that realization, Hannah saw a possibility. For if a blade could be held steady by fear, then it could also be turned by it. Hannah began to understand. The guards were not her enemies. They were captives, waiting for release, just as much as she was. The evening meal at Ashford Estate always unfolded in ritual. Silver plates clinked, wine spilled into crystal, laughter rose like thunder. Hannah carried dishes from the kitchen with silent precision, her body moving as if guided by memory rather than thought. Beside her, Ruth, a girl younger by 2 years, quick with her hands but always nervous, clutched a tray of wine. It happened in a heartbeat, a stumble, the glint of glass slipping, the sharp shatter of crystal striking the floor. A gasp rippled through the dining hall, then silence, heavy and breathless. The master's face flushed dark with fury. No one dared move, no one dared breathe. The sound of a single chair scraping across the floor echoed louder than a storm. The punishment came swift. The crack of impact was heard, not seen. Hannah's eyes closed as if that could block it out. She opened them only to glimpse Ruth crumpled, her body folded against the wall, blood spreading slowly beneath her like spilled wine. There were no screams, no last words. Only the hollow sound of broken glass still rolling across the floor. The guards stood nearby, swords at their sides, but not one shifted forward. Their faces tightened, jaws clenched, but their eyes betrayed them. For a moment, Hannah saw it, an unguarded flicker of horror, the human recoil of men forced to witness cruelty and remain still. It was the same silence the enslaved carried every day, now mirrored in those meant to keep them oppressed. Ruth's body was dragged out swiftly, her absence leaving a void too large to ignore. In the courtyard later that night, no one spoke her name aloud, but the memory of her broken frame haunted the air. Hannah carried water as always, but her eyes searched the walls, catching again the look of the guards. They had been powerless to act, yet their silence had not been loyalty, it had been fear. Fear of a man who controlled their wages, their lives, their honor. And in that moment, Hannah understood something crucial. The same force that bent her people's backs bent the guards as well. Fear ruled all, and fear could be turned. If fear could silence men, then it might also drive them to raise their swords against the one they feared most. Hannah began her work not with fire, not with speeches, but with whispers. The kitchen was her stage, its corners alive with smoke, clatter, and exhaustion. Guards often lingered there, leaning against doorframes with weary shoulders, hoping for a scrap of food or a word to break the monotony of their post. It was here, in the in-between spaces, that Hannah sowed her seeds. She never spoke of rebellion outright. That would have been foolish, too sharp, too dangerous. Instead, she asked questions small, subtle, but heavy enough to linger. "Do you think he would spare his daughter if she stumbled?" she murmured one evening as a guard nursed a bruised wrist. The man looked at her, startled, but found no accusation in her face, only curiosity, almost innocence. At another time, she recalled aloud, as though by accident, how one guard had been cursed and humiliated by the master in front of his peers, all because he failed to polish a boot properly. She let the memory hang in the smoke, a reminder of shame unforgotten. Her words never accused, they only reflected. She held up a mirror to the men, forcing them to see themselves as the master truly did, tools, disposable and mocked. And slowly, the cracks widened. The guards who once struck hard began to ease their blows. The whips that had sung through the air fell with less conviction. One even pretended not to notice when Hannah slipped a piece of bread to a starving child. In the yard, when eyes met between guard and captive, a strange recognition flickered. They were not kin, not allies, not yet, but the iron line between them blurred. Around the fire one night, Hannah whispered to another, "Loyalty to him brings only scorn, but to stand with each other, perhaps there lies honor." The guard did not reply. His jaw shifted, his gaze fell, but his silence carried weight. For the first time, Hannah saw them not as extensions of the master's will, but as men wrestling with their own chains. The walls of Ashford Estate had not fallen, but the foundation of fear was beginning to crack. Ashford Estate lived by a rhythm as rigid as the strike of a clock. At dawn the overseer barked, at noon the sun scorched, at night the guards circled the walls. Yet within that rhythm, Hannah began to weave her own counterbeat, softer, quieter, but steady as breath. She understood that men did not change in a single night. They bent, little by little, in moments that seemed inconsequential. A word here, a glance there, a silence kept when once there might have been a shout. She worked not with force but with patience, and patience was sharper than steel. When the master ordered a child whipped for dropping seeds, Hannah watched closely. One guard raised his lash but let it fall light, barely brushing the boy's back. The child flinched, but the pain was not there. Their eyes met Hannah's, and the guard's, and in that instant, she offered nothing more than the smallest nod. She saw it. Hesitation had rooted itself, and once rooted, hesitation could bloom into defiance. Another night, she deliberately passed close to the watchline, carrying a crust of bread tucked into her apron. She paused long enough for one soldier to notice, his gaze sharp. She expected the bark of command, the flash of steel, but his eyes flickered instead, and he looked away, pretending not to see. The bread reached a starving boy that night, and Hannah knew the wall had begun to crack. She crafted signals, delicate as spider threads. A glance toward the ground meant hold your hand, a tilt of her chin meant look away, a whispered phrase disguised as prayer carried meaning beyond its words. And the guards, whether consciously or not, responded. Their discipline once iron softened at the edges. No rebellion had yet been spoken, but in action, something had shifted. Blows landed slower. Orders were obeyed with reluctance. The circle of protection around the master no longer gleamed with certainty. Hannah did not smile, did not boast. She only watched, her silence, her shield. But in her chest, she carried the knowledge that steel could turn. That night, as she lay awake listening to the torches hiss in the rain, Hannah knew. The master's fortress had already been breached, not by fire or by force, but by doubt. The breaking point did not come in shadows but in daylight, before all eyes. It was harvest season. The fields crowded, the air thick with sweat and dust. The master, Elias Ashford, strode through the rows with his usual arrogance, a whip coiled at his side like a pet serpent. His guards marched at his back, their blades gleaming. A slip of labor displeased him, too slow, too clumsy, perhaps nothing at all. He turned, fury rising, but instead of striking the workers, he wheeled upon his own men. Useless, he spat, his voice carrying across the field. You cannot keep them in line. You are cowards. Dogs leashed by scraps. The words struck harder than any lash. He cuffed one guard across the face, the crack of skin against skin, echoing. Blood welled at the corner of the man's lip as the others stood frozen, shame burning hotter than the Sunday. Around them, the workers paused, eyes wide, watching not in fear but in dawning recognition. For years the guards had been the walls of Ashford's power. Now, before everyone, those walls were mocked, belittled, torn down by the very man they served. It was humiliation not in private, but in spectacle. Hannah watched from the edge of the field, her body bent as if burdened by the weight of a bucket. Yet her eyes saw everything, the stiff shoulders of the guards, the fists clenched at their sides, the way one looked at another with the spark of unspeakable rage. That night, when the fires burned low and silence lay heavy, Hannah approached them quietly. She did not raise her voice. She did not beg. She whispered, steady as ever, "He has made slaves of us all. When the sword turns back, he will have no shield." The words did not fall on stone. They landed on bruised pride, on festering anger, on fear too long endured. And in the darkness, the silence of the guards no longer felt like resistance, it felt like consent. Ashford believed his fortress unbreakable. Yet in one reckless moment, he had weakened the only walls that held it upright. The moon did not rise that night. Clouds thick as wool hung over the Carolina sky, smothering the light, leaving the Ashford estate in a hushed darkness broken only by the hiss of torches. It was a night made for secrets. Hannah walked toward the stables, where 4 guards had gathered, their armor dulled, their faces shadowed. They had not been summoned, yet they came. Whether by chance or unspoken agreement, it did not matter. What mattered was the air between them, heavy with words unsaid. She stood before them, a slight figure in the gloom, no weapon in her hands, no force at her back, yet her voice, low and steady, carried more weight than steel. "You think yourselves free because you carry swords," she whispered. "But every command you obey has chained you tighter than any shackle on our wrists. He has bound you with fear, with humiliation, with shame. You know this." The men shifted uneasily. One touched the hilt of his sword, not in threat but in reflex, as if needing the reassurance of its presence. Their breath came slow and heavy, visible in the cold. Hannah did not beg them to turn. She gave them mirrors, reflections of truths they already knew. She recalled the sting of insults spat at them in front of laborers. She reminded them of the bruises left not by enemies, but by the hand they were sworn to protect. "He has made slaves of us all," she said, her voice cutting through the dark. "You guard him because you fear him. But tell me who guards you." Silence deepened. Torches sputtered. In that quiet, their hands tightened, loosening again, as if the decision itself was a battle fought inside their chests. Finally, one lowered his eyes and gave the faintest nod. It was not surrender, nor open rebellion. It was recognition. The others said nothing, but none stepped away. Hannah's heart raced, though her face remained calm. She knew what this meant. The circle was cracking. When the swords left their sheaths next, they would not rise for Ashford. Ashford emerged from his house with drunken fury, his boots striking the earth with the arrogance of a man certain of invincibility. He had been roused from sleep, enraged at rumors of disobedience. His voice cut through the air, sharp, commanding, certain of obedience. "Stand ready," he barked, his eyes sweeping the line of guards. "Do your duty. Protect me. Remind them who rules this ground." The men shifted into formation, as they always had. To anyone watching, nothing seemed amiss. Their blades glimmered, their stances precise, their faces carved of stone. But behind them, in the shadow of the wall, Hannah waited. She pressed her lips together and released a single note, a short, piercing whistle. It was nothing more than a scrap of sound, easily dismissed as wind. Yet it was signal, the thread tying her whispers to action. In unison, the guards adjusted their stance. The shift was small, almost imperceptible until the angle of their blades caught the firelight. And in that instant, Ashford saw it. The steel that once pointed outward now glinted inward. His voice faltered, the arrogance cracked. What is this?" he stammered, stepping back, searching for loyalty in eyes that no longer met his. The night exploded in motion. There was no need for detail. The clash of steel, the grunt of bodies colliding, the sudden eruption of chaos told the story. A torch fell, scattering sparks across the earth. Ashford's roar broke into a scream, then dissolved into silence swallowed by the dark. Hannah did not move forward, did not watch. She turned her eyes away, staring at the horizon, where dawn would one day break. What happened behind her was not for triumph, but for release. The sound of metal striking, of breath tearing, of rage unleashed filled the night. The fortress of Ashford, built on fear, was collapsing not with fire from without, but with swords turning within. And when the noise ebbed, when the silence rushed back heavier than before, it was done. The man who once slept secure behind blades had awakened to find those same blades turned against him. Dawn crept over Carolina with a pale, reluctant light. At Ashford Estate, the courtyard lay in disarray, torches burned down to stubs, doors ajar, silence where commands once cracked like whips. Word spread quickly. Elias Ashford was gone. Some whispered he had fled in the night. Others claimed he was swallowed by his own guards. None spoke too loudly. The enslaved moved carefully through the day, uncertain whether freedom or vengeance would follow. Roberts, Ashford's nephew, soon appeared to claim the estate. He strutted with borrowed authority, but his voice wavered. The circle of guards he inherited was thin and unsteady. They stood not as a wall but as scattered men, shadows of what they had been. Their loyalty, once unquestioned, now cracked beyond repair. The fields, once bristling with command, felt looser. Blows landed less often. Orders carried less sting. Yet danger remained. New masters always rose. New chains always clinked. But something irreversible had shifted. The terror that once bound every hand, every glance, no longer held the same grip. And Hannah, she was gone. Not vanished in chains, not swallowed by silence, but gone like smoke slipping through a crack. Some said she was taken north in the secret current of the Underground Railroad. At night, if one looked closely, there were signs: a white cloth draped across a fence post, a lantern flickering once in the dark, footsteps pressed faintly into the earth, leading away from the estate. Those who believed told of her crossing a hidden threshold, guided by shadows who knew the paths through swamps and woods. They imagined her reaching safe houses, where whispers became maps, where doors opened quietly in defiance of law. Perhaps she made it to the north, perhaps not. The record books held no answer. What remained was her absence and the echo of her whispers. Even without her presence, men and women at Ashford remembered the questions she planted, the mirrors she held to trembling faces. The guards themselves walked differently, their shoulders bent not by loyalty but by shame and memory. In the stories passed from mouth to mouth, Hannah had not simply survived. She had left a scar upon the estate, a memory that lingered like smoke. And though her footsteps disappeared into the dark, her voice remained, turning in men's ears long after she was gone. In Carolina's folklore, a quiet tale took root, the tale of a woman who turned swords back upon the hand that commanded them. She was not named in ledgers, nor praised in newspapers. To the powerful, she did not exist, but among those who labored, those who lived in chains, she was remembered. They spoke of her not with shouts but with reverence. The woman who listened, who saw fear and reshaped it, who transformed silence into strength. They called her the one who turned blades into wind, for when the guards lowered their swords against Ashford, it was as if a storm had shifted direction. Her story spread quietly, stitched into songs, woven into prayers, passed along with the same caution as a candle shielded from the wind. It was not a story of revenge alone, but of transformation, proof that fear could collapse into courage, that even those bound to cruelty could be unbound. And in the empty courtyard of Ashford Estate, long after walls rotted and torches fell, the wind still whistled through gaps in the timber. Some swore it carried her voice, whispering reminders that no fortress of fear is eternal, that no blade is loyal forever. It was not the sword that saved them, but the belief that fear itself could turn, and in that belief, Hannah's legacy endured.